I was living it vicariously through my son, who he's 25 now, but back then, I guess he was 24, 23. He had invested in it early on, and he was going through the blow by blow. So he would come, and at the time it was COVID, and he was living with us. So he had a lot at stake. He was doing the options. He was very much one of our central characters in a way. And he would come running down and be like, they just shut down Robinhood, they just shut down Wall-Street bets. And you'd see the outrage and the protests happening online, and just the stress levels of like when to sell, not to sell. I mean, every 3 minutes he was checking his phone. So I was, and then just sort of the system feeling rigged after all this happened, and trying to figure out what exactly happened between Robinhood and Citadel, and all of these things that were happening in real time. I was living with him, and I wasn't thinking about doing a movie about it, honestly. I was working with Rebecca, and Angelo and Lauren Bloom, who we were working on a project together that fell apart, and they happened to be working on Dumb Money. And I'd constantly been talking about it with them because of what was going on with my son. He followed Roaring Kitty. It's like there are definitely some gifts in the film that were inspired by him showing me stuff in real time. He was in early, and he timed it perfectly. I knew the writers, and the project we were working on fell apart, and I think literally the next day the script came over for Dumb Money, and I love their writing. And it was riveting, and it channeled into like all the things that I found interesting. It was like an emotional ride. There was outrage involved. There was like this marginalization of the haves versus the have-nots. This real frustration with like the system feeling like it's rigged. And there was a lot of things tied into like that timing with COVID, with what was happening out in politics and in the world. And it just became like a perfect platform for that. It's a combination of, like Marcus and the college girls, in the sense of just how much was at stake for them, and the stress levels involved in terms of when to sell, not to sell, the loyalty and the conflict that they had between like supporting the movement and needing the money, which was really interesting. So just the intensity of that emotion was what I got to tap into because of what I experienced at home. It's a very complicated story in some senses. I mean, obviously it's the David versus Goliath idea, but and there's some key players that are all based on reality: Gabe Plock and Ken Griffin, Steve Cohen, Roaring Kitty as Keith Gill. But there's 8 million people that were invested in this. So we tried to get these amalgamations of various different groups and what happened, because there were the people that made money, that got in early. There were people that came in a little too late, didn't sell. And we tried to represent each group, so it wasn't like everybody did well in this. And there was some real casualties to it from what happened with Robinhood shutting down the buy option and the stock tanking, and there's a lot of people that got hurt. So we wanted to be able to represent all the groups. And America Ferrera's character in that case would represent the group that got hurt. Crazily, it's like, yes, they lost the most, but probably affected them the least. We're talking like, at that point, in time, it was 6.8 billion that Melvin Capital lost, and they eventually closed down shop, the next year. But I think personally he's doing fine. It's like there were people that lost their livelihoods on the other side of the spectrum, and that outrage and that lack of accountability, I think, is what we try to tap into in the film. Yeah, unusual shoot in the sense that we have, I guess, about 12 different actors, almost all doing cameos. I mean, obviously Paul was the longest section, which I think was 8 or 9 days. But for the most part, it was between 3 and 5 days with each actor. So it was almost a little mini movie each time they came in. It's like you're starting over, you're figuring out your relationship and how to do the dance together, like on the set, and work together, and how they like to work. So every week it would be a new experience, which was kind of wild. It's a very complicated dynamic that's happening, and our writers, Rebecca and Lauren, used to work for the Wall Street Journal, so they're investigative reporters. And just even from a legal standpoint, we wanted to be very specific and clear about actually how things were said and how things went down. So, the timing of what happened with Robinhood and what they did and why they did it is all accurate. And there was a lot of speculation and conspiracy theories, but it's like, and you can sort of take we've taken the information that is available, and then the audience can take with it what they want, and dissect it themselves. So we're sort of presenting it in that way. But literally, the conversation he's having with AOC is verbatim. It's like that's how we got to use all of those pieces, because we had to stick to what actually happened and what was said. And it's kind of astounding, it's like Gay Plotkin literally was on mute for the testimony. So these things that, we had to be very specific about what we were portraying, when there were real people involved. It's interesting. It's like everything for me is coming from character, and I rely on our writers for the specificity of what is correct and what's accurate. And so I might question certain things, would be like, can we do this? Did that happen? Did something like this happen? For instance, in my research, I found an article that Steve Cohen had a pet pig for, I think, 11 years. And I read that, and I'm like, we have to put a pig in the movie. It's just such an unusual, interesting character trait. So there would be things like that would evolve. Honestly, it's like seeing the actual testimony of Keith Gill and how riveting that was. I was like, that has to be in the film. We want to see Paul get to that point, because the performance is really interesting to watch, and he's very careful with his words, and it's like he's trying to thread a needle through a very tiny space and not get caught in any legal traps, but also like being very brave about what he's saying, and all those attributes we wanted to make sure we got right. Sebastien, obviously we have a history together. We've done I, Tanya, and Pam and Tommy, and I love working with him, and he can do the range, like the humor, the drama, the intimidation. He can play it meek. It's like whatever you need. Amazingly, Sebastien can bring it. And there was sort of it's like we took like all of our cues from what we could find online, like the interviews he did with Elon, the interviews with various like news anchors. It's like, and they were, and trying to take from those traits of what he was giving, like what he didn't seem to know, how he'd try and talk around things, and that sort of would inform Sebastien with his character, and then he would sort of lean into that, and and it would take that in other moments where it's like, I read that he likes to go to a lot of like celebrity parties, so I was like, let's put him in a party when he gets the call, so you sort of find out like certain character traits and things that are going on and try and build upon that. And I just knew like wherever I put Sebastien, he'd deliver. I think that whole world is competitive, and it's like, if they can help you, great, and if they're not helping you, the word prick keeps coming up a lot in the film. And in this case, it's like, it was an opportunity both for Steve Cohen and for Ken Griffin. They get to bail out Gabe Plotkin, who has a great track record outside of what happened at GameStop, and they wouldn't be putting their money there if they didn't believe in him. And ultimately, both Steve Cohen and Ken Griffin, I believe, ended up making money out of this whole situation. So, they knew what they were doing. Robinhood advertised themselves as free trading, but the reality is they're getting a small fee from Citadel when they run their trades through Citadel. So Citadel is actually their client, not the consumer. And that's the interesting thing with the internet. If it's free, somebody's paying for your information. They made it as simple and as interactive as possible, which makes it easier for people to use. Amazingly too, it's like they made it very simple and encouraged options, which they would get more of a fee on than regular trades. And options are incredibly complicated math that outside of the United States I don't think are allowed. And so you've got people coming into the stock world for the first time ever and playing options. Them not understanding that it's not like, I think the big misconception of like the naivety for some traders was you have your stocks, if it goes down a certain percentage. If you miss on an option, you lose all of it. It goes to zero. The thing that we were most fascinated by was how he was handling all the pressure. Like when you drop from 47 million to 16 million and you don't sell, like, that moment was sort of like what was happening in that house that they decided to hang on and stay true. I mean, and you could, you get a sense, and that's what we would sort of mine from the hours and hours and hours of videos that he did. And there's a really, an altruistic side to him and a real belief in the company and his choices there. So, we would mine from that, but it would be fascinating to hear.